Turning points change the course of our lives, whether it's a big decision, overcoming an obstacle or tragedy, or taking a leap of faith. These stories of inspiration and resilience are what Turning Point is all about. Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Turning Point. I'm your host, Priya Sam, and today I'm so thrilled to have the host of CBC's Canada Tonight, Ginella Massa, as our guest. Ginella is an award-winning journalist, and she is also Canada's first hijab-wearing reporter and anchor. Her biggest turning point happened when she quit a full-time job in 2014 to pursue her dream of being an on-air reporter. We'll hear much more about that shortly. Ginella, welcome to Turning Point.
Hi, Priya. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. And I think to start here, it'd be great to just go back in time a little bit and hear about when you started thinking about pursuing a career in journalism.
I was that kid in class who couldn't stop talking. That was the number one comment on my report card. Janella's a good student, but she talks too much when she shouldn't. So, I was always someone who loved being in the spotlight, loved being in the center of attention, very inquisitive, very high energy. And, I was involved in the school plays and speech competitions. I actually specifically remember, in the third grade, being in a speech competition that I won. And kind of feeling for the first time I can put all this talking to good use, to use, and people are actually listening. People are actually, paying attention and interested by what I have to say. And so I loved that feeling. It was my mom actually who suggested that maybe I wanted to pursue a career as a host or in broadcasting. I think she was worried I was going to tell her I wanted to be an actress. So she was trying to steer me in the direction of something a little bit more stable and reputable. So so that was, it was from quite a young age that I knew I wanted to do something kind of in the spotlight.
Very cool. I had very similar experience, and it's funny how now it all makes sense. But I remember being younger and thinking I don't know, these are things I like, but how am I ever going to make money doing these things?
Yeah. And what's funny, I do a lot of class talks to young kids and stuff like that. And I always tell them often the thing that is pointed out as your weakness, as your downfall, is actually your strength and your superpower. So how do you harness that and play to your strengths?
Oh, I love that. That's such a good message because it's true. Sometimes those characteristics are kind of discouraged when you're a kid and you're talking a lot in class or asking a lot of questions.
You're disruptive, class clown.
Oh, that's such a good message. I guess after you finished your education and then you started looking for jobs. I mean, I remember what that was like, being in the same boat. I think we both know that landing that first job, whether it's part-time or full-time in the industry, is no easy feat. So what was your first job in journalism?
So my first job, I was an editorial assistant at CTV Toronto, which is one of the largest local newsrooms in the country. It was extremely scary and daunting. I was really lucky. So I had an internship there, and that internship turned into, casual backfill over the summer. And then there was a mat leave that opened up, and my manager was like, "You should apply." And I was like, okay, I guess. I was kind of scared, but I was really lucky that he kind of mentored me a little bit and trained me and saw, potential in me and allowed me to make mistakes. I certainly made a lot of mistakes. I certainly got told that I was making mistakes, but you kind of make them once and you never make them again. It was a steep learning curve. So basically, for people who don't know, an editorial assistant, basically you work at the assignment desk, which is kind of the hub, the center of the newsroom. That's where, the camera operators get assigned. You're listening to fire and police scanners. You're answering the phones, people calling in with tips or story ideas. You're setting up interviews for the reporters. So you're kind of really the hub, and doing a lot of that kind of background work. But you have to have good editorial sense and good editorial judgment. And I was fresh out of out of journalism school. So, it took a little bit of learning, not knowing which fire calls I should be sending cameras to and which ones I can ignore, and which stories are worth following up on and which ones aren't. So I really learned to kind of hone my news sense and my editorial decision making in that job, thanks to some of the mentors that I had there. But it was definitely a tough first job, and I cried in the parking lot a lot. Not in the newsroom, but in the parking lot.
So I had the exact same job as my first job, and I also definitely spent some time crying in the parking lot. But I agree, like it is a steep learning curve. You just learn so much so quickly. And then when you do, like I remember when I was finally in an on-air position looking back, I mean, you just have so much appreciation for all of that work. I think that happens behind the scenes too.
Definitely. I think it's definitely great to be able to do some of those other roles, which you'll then be on the other side of and be interacting with. You appreciate and respect your colleagues so much when you've done their job and you know how hard it is.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. So your biggest turning point happens when you decide to leave a full-time job in journalism, which, we've already said very hard to find those full-time jobs, but you get to this point where you decide you're going to leave because you're going to pursue your dream of being an on-air reporter. So tell me how you made that decision.
Yeah, it was really tough. And this was, so after I'd been an editorial assistant, I was a maternity leave, so I was only there for a year. I stayed on for a couple months. And then I moved on to my next role where I was a chase producer for a national 24-hour news channel. So basically my job was to book guests. That was the main function of my job, was to book guests, write research packages for the host and all that kind of stuff. And I did that for, I think, almost 3 years. And it got to a point where I was really good at it. I was really good at it, and my reward for being really good at it was more work. And getting to that place where I was the one who was training the interns and training the new staff. And, I felt like I was kind of being passed over for opportunities to grow and move on. Because I was so good at my job, it was a blessing and a curse. They wanted me to keep doing that job. And so, I was thinking about what do I want to do next? And is this position, going to help me get there, because it doesn't feel like I'm really getting those opportunities to grow into the next role. And I was feeling kind of overworked, underpaid, undervalued. And there's nothing wrong with working hard, and we all have to kind of do those jobs, but it gets to a point where it's not really serving you anymore. And I was applying for all of these, on-air positions. And as you know, it's hard for news directors to hire people who don't have experience on air. And a lot of the opportunities that were being offered to me were freelance or contract or part-time, or we can get you to backfill over the summer or Christmas just to try you out. But there wasn't like a full-time opportunity from, especially in Toronto. There wasn't any full-time kind of opportunities available to me. And so these sort of gigs here and there where they were willing to give me a chance, I couldn't take them because I had a full-time job, and I couldn't go and do a side gig for the competition or for another station. So it was really tough. I was kind of in this place where I was trying to decide what to do, and it probably took me like 6 months to really make that decision that I was going to quit. And there were a couple of situations that happened where I had, applied for a job and I was kind of passed over, and, I'd asked for a raise and I didn't get one. And so I was thinking long and hard about it. I was really lucky that at the time I was young. I was living with my parents, so I kind of had some financial, safety net in that sense. And I decided to quit, and I didn't have any other job lined up. And I said, I'm gonna freelance, write and produce and do a little bit of media consulting. I'm going to continue volunteering at Rogers TV, where I was volunteering to work on my demo. And I'm going to apply to these jobs and hopefully get some of these little on-air gigs that I can build up my demo reel and build some networks and build some rapport that maybe will help me sort of, get that on-air job. And it was really scary. And people looked at me like I was nuts because, especially in journalism, I had a full-time job with benefits, and people were like dying for that, right? And they're like, "You're gonna quit without something else lined up? Are you crazy?" I wasn't unemployed for that long. It was 8 months of kind of freelancing and working on my demo. And I landed my first on-air gig at CTV Kitchener. in 2015, January 2015. And I should mention, though, I didn't just land it within those 8 months. I had applied for that job like 3 times over the course of 2 years, and I'd been turned down multiple times. So, yeah. So I kind of had to bet on myself a little bit and take that leap and say, if this is what I want to do, I want to at least try and jump in wholeheartedly and see where it takes me. And it paid off.
That is some real persistence, applying for that job 3 different times. Yeah, kudos to you. What was that? Do you remember the moment when you found out you got it?
Yeah, it was surreal. And actually, I should mention, it was like a permanent part-time position. But as you know, in journalism, I was getting like 3 to 5 shifts a week. I was basically working full time, but it was officially a part-time job. It was really exciting. It was really scary. You know, as I said, I had applied for that job 3 different times. The hiring manager had actually changed. So by the time I got hired by someone else who hadn't been the person who'd rejected me. And, you know, they seemed to take a liking to me, and you know, we also talked a little bit about the fact that I had to be the one to kind of raise the elephant in the room and say, look, I know no one on TV has ever worn hijab before, and you know, I recognize that, you know, that might be a risk, and I think being the one to kind of open the door to that conversation and kind of have a candid conversation helped, because then we could really talk about, you know, any apprehensions or concerns that they might have. And, you know, he said, at the end of the day, you know, we just want you to be a journalist, and we, you know, we want you to do the best that you can, just like any of our other staff. And you know, that's our hope for you. So, you know, that first day of being on air, of course, even just in general, that first day of being on air as a reporter is nerve-wracking. You don't want to mess up. You don't want to look dumb on TV. You don't want the people who hired you to think like, oh my God, we made a mistake. And then on top of that, I had this added layer of, I had no idea what the response was going to be like. Were people going to start flooding the station with angry phone calls and emails? Were they going to start like rioting and picketing outside? And like that was in the back of my mind. It was like, I don't know how the community is going to react. Especially because I'm from Toronto. So I'm from a large multicultural city, and going to a smaller market in Kitchener. It's a medium-sized market, but I didn't know anything about it. So I wasn't sure how they might receive it. And I was pleasantly surprised by the overwhelmingly positive response, in that, you know, in fact, there was actually little fanfare about me being there. It kind of happened, and then life went on, which was kind of nice. You know, I would get a couple of emails here and there from people, you know, a woman wrote me and she said, you know, sometimes when I go out and I'm wearing hijab, I feel like people are looking at me and I feel like an outsider. And then I see you on TV and that makes me feel like I belong here. So hearing stuff like that, you know, and then, you know, people who would just come up to me while I was out, you know, shooting my story. Oh, you're the new girl at CTV. Oh, we love watching you. You're doing such a great job, you know? And so feeling that like sense of relief of like, okay, wow, like people are just seeing me and judging me for my work and my journalism, and you know, they're able to look past what I'm wearing and actually judge me as a journalist. And I remember when I left, I actually asked my news director, because I wondered, I said, did you get any reaction? Did you know, maybe he was protecting me from it. He's like, I think in the year you were here, we got maybe 2 negative emails. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really great. And yeah, so, you know, it seemed like the community was mostly, you know, ready to see them, to see Canada reflected on their screens.
That's so great to hear. And but I can imagine how you would have felt, though, in that moment, because I think anytime you're the first or you're the only, there is this added pressure. And especially when you're in a situation like that, where it's not like it's something that you can talk to a colleague about and they'll understand, and you'll have that support from somebody with you. And not to say that people aren't supportive, but there's something about talking to someone who knows what you're going through. So I think not being able to have that would have probably made it feel even scarier.
Definitely. And that was kind of the tough part too, is like not having I had mentors, but not people who had had similar experiences as me, or people who could really give me advice or I could go to. And even my news director, who was like, we just want you to be like every other journalist, you know. In some ways, you know, it was a little bit tone deaf, because I felt like, I remember one time I got a interview request that someone wanted to do a story on the fact that I was the first hijab wearing reporter. And they said no. In terms of my boss said no, because he said, you know, we don't really want you to become the story. You know, as you said, it was before, you're just like every other journalist here. We don't want to treat you differently. And like, they didn't want to draw attention to that. But to me, I felt like they were doing themselves a disservice, because the reality was my experience was different from my colleagues. You know, what I was going through was different from my colleagues, and it was unique, and it was something worth celebrating. And they missed the opportunity to celebrate that they were the first to do it. And so, you know, there was this attitude of being sort of colorblind. Like, oh, we don't see race. We don't see the fact that you're just a journalist to us. And to me, that was kind of like an interesting approach.
Right. Yeah. Like, maybe not coming from a bad place, but definitely tone deaf, and definitely a missed opportunity, especially because, like, you mentioned, you know, getting a few messages from people who really felt seen and seeing you on TV. And as your profile has continued to grow, I mean, you have influenced so many women and girls right across the country, and become, you know, a role model for so many people. So I wonder, in that moment, like, we talked a little bit about the fear of that first appearance on TV, but did you have any sense of this influence, and you know, of this really big moment, and how much you were going to impact the lives of other people?
Yeah, like I said, because there was a reluctance to kind of celebrate it when I was in Kitchener, it was kind of a slow burn in that, you know, I'd get a little bit of reaction here and there, but it wasn't kind of like a big deal was made of it until I came to Toronto. And then suddenly I hit a much wider audience, and then suddenly there was more international attention, and suddenly, you know, and it's so interesting, because also the more exposure I got, the more popular I became in terms of people knowing who I was. That's when I dealt with more hate. That's when I got more negative reaction. So you would think, actually, coming to Toronto, a more multicultural city, that it would be much more welcoming, or much more, you know, much easier. That's actually when I first started to deal with kind of like hate mail, negative tweets, comments, emails, and just like racist stuff. So yeah, I did know when I got hired that it was a big deal. I kind of was almost reluctant to make a big deal about it at first, because I thought, let me just get good at what I'm doing before I draw too much attention to myself. Like, I'm brand new, and I don't want to be scrutinized and all these eyes watching me. So I was kind of glad to have that year, you know, in some level of obscurity, to like get better at my job and feel more confident at what I was doing. So I was a little bit more equipped when I went to Toronto. But I didn't think it was going to have such an international reaction. So when I went to City, and when I anchored a year later, that's when it kind of really exploded, and I started to get all these international media requests and things like that. And even my boss was like, you know, a year later, I was still getting asked to do stuff. And even now, here we are 7 years later. And he was like, oh, is this ever going to stop? Is this ever going to slow down? And I would say to him, look, I'm one of one in Canada, in North America at the time. Now I'm one of maybe 2 or 3 in Canada, and one of maybe 5 in North America. But at the time, you know, for so long, I was the first and the only. And so, you know, I don't think he even realized or recognized just how much of a big deal it meant to a lot of people.
Yeah, that must have been, I mean, an eye-opening experience kind of for everyone. And I guess for you, as you were thrust into this international spotlight, how did you manage like all of this positive reaction and all of the good things that were happening with, you know, some of the negative comments that you mentioned as well?
Yeah, you know, I learned to realize that most of the people who had something negative to say had never watched any of my reports, had never read any of my work. They weren't actually familiar with my journalism. They'd just seen my picture and a headline, and they decided they were offended by it. And I came to the conclusion that was their problem, not mine. Like, if you have a problem with what I'm wearing, that's your problem to deal with. Don't make it my problem. And I think that that's something, you know, as women in general, we deal with. And I'm sure, you know, being a woman, you know, who works in the public spotlight, everyone thinks that they're entitled to their opinion about you, how you look, how you dress. You know, remember I had someone tweeting me about my nail polish was chipped. I'm like, okay, I didn't realize that was such a crucial part of me being a journalist. And so, yeah, I think we're obsessed with what women are wearing, what they're not wearing. We want to dress them. We want to undress them. They look too professional. They look unprofessional. They're wearing too much makeup. They're not wearing enough makeup. Like, we just spend so much time talking about women's dress in general. And so for me, I kind of put it in that category where I was like, let's focus on the journalism. If you have something to say about my story and what I've written, or you have some feedback or constructive criticism, sure, we can have a conversation. But if it's just on what I'm wearing, I'm not really here for that conversation.
You, just the way you said that, it really is something that I feel like we need to like teach in journalism school almost, because I remember, I mean, especially early in my career, I had such a hard time separating some of those, like, you know, those personal or like ridiculous comments, like, that lipstick looks terrible on you, or you wore that outfit twice this week, or whatever.
And there is so much focus in journalism school. Yeah. Like, I don't know about you. Oh, sorry, I'm like adjusting my scarf because I'm looking at myself in the mirror.
Oh, good.
But in the thing. But even in journalism school, there's so much obsession with like the girls have to cut their hair to be TV ready. Like they have to, you know, you had to know how to do your makeup, and like there was a big emphasis on that. And often, you know, the people who are hiring are men. They are looking at your appearance. It's part of it. I think it's changing a little bit now, but there still is so much focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good lesson to think about just that first, when you get those messages, like, okay, is this about my work? It's not? Okay, I'm not interested, you know, because really, like, that's what we should be focused on. Like you said, if someone has a comment on a story or an editorial decision, that's a different conversation. But yeah, I think that's really good advice. So we talked about your journey to Toronto, to City. Now you're on the national stage. You are the host of Canada Tonight. It is a national show on CBC. So tell me about being on the national stage now, and what are you enjoying most about your current role?
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's still surreal to, you know, have my name on a national show like this. And, you know, I think for so long, like even just being on air in hijab was such kind of a fantasy that I wasn't sure was even going to be able to be achieved. I don't think I even really dreamed or aspired this big, because I didn't know that I could get this far. So it still feels really surreal to have this role on a national stage. But it's really exciting to be, you know, to be part of a new show that I was able to help develop, to try to, you know, bring different voices and bring different stories to to our newscast, to our show that, you know, don't always get told, or people that we don't always hear from. So that's one of our mandates too. I mean, for me, it's just exciting to get to talk to people across the country, to get to tell their stories. And, you know, at a time where this pandemic, right, it's one of the biggest stories of our lives. It's impacted everyone. We're all just trying to navigate and understand and figure out how to sift through all of this information that's coming at us and constantly changing. So I feel a responsibility. I feel like, you know, my job is a public service and a public good. And that's what kind of motivates me.
It's interesting to hear a little bit about kind of the development of the show, because this is such a unique and rare opportunity in Canadian media to come into something like this, where you actually get to be part of the foundation and creating something and deciding, you know, what are we going to focus on and what stories are we going to tell, and like how is this team, what is the vision this team is going to have. So tell me a little bit more about that. And, you know, once you found out you got the job, like what was your vision for this show?
Yeah, but I will say, first of all, that we definitely had our work cut out for us, because I started this job during the pandemic at a news station with, you know, people I don't know. And, you know, some of my team, I still have not met them in person a year and a half on. So it's, you know, the fact that we have done what we have, you know, is a small miracle.
No kidding.
And because of it, there are some limitations and there are some things that we haven't been able to do that I hope we will once we're kind of back together again and in a space where we can team build and bond and build, rapport and trust with each other, because it's so much harder to do that with people you don't know from a little screen. But yeah, I mean, when I got the job, we spent 6 weeks kind of developing the show, talking about what we wanted to do, what we wanted, to do different. And the thing is that it's evolved since we launched, because as we go, we see what works, we see what doesn't, we see what audiences respond to, we see what don't. So it still is a work in progress until, now we've already passed our 1 year mark. I still consider it a show that is in development, because it takes time to find our footing and to find our voice. And I think we're still working on it.
I guess that kind of leads me into this question about Canadian media in general, because you've worked at local stations in a medium-sized market like Kitchener, then a local station in Toronto. Now you're working at CBC on a national show. I mean, when you look at the Canadian media landscape, what would you like to see change? What would you say would be the biggest change you would like to see?
I mean, especially for legacy media, I think that we really have to start thinking about the future and our place and where people are accessing their news. I mean, look at what you're doing here, right? The reality is that, people our age and younger, don't have cable, that they are getting their news online, on social media, in small snippets when they want it immediately. And so I think sometimes legacy media takes for granted, especially as a public broadcaster where, we are publicly funded, that, we are in jeopardy of becoming a dinosaur. And we have to be forward thinking and proactive in what does the future of media look like, and how do we, instead of being reactive, how do we be proactive in being where people are, right? Meeting people where they are, instead of saying, how do we get them to come to us? We say, well, we got to go where they already are. So, that's also one of my, constant conversations that I'm having with my managers about, how do we engage our younger, more diverse audience in the ways that they want to be engaged, in the ways that they are already consuming media and news and information.
Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense. And it's great to know, I mean, just for someone like me, and I think for a lot of people, just to know that people like you are in these positions now where you're part of this conversation, where you have influence over the future of media. It's really, it's a really beautiful thing to see. And now as we kind of look back, I guess it's been 8 years since your biggest turning point when you left that full-time job to pursue an on-air role. Obviously, it's turned out very well for you as you now have a national show. But in that time, what would you say has been your biggest learning as you kind of reflect on everything that's happened?
Well, quitting that job was a turning point for me in the sense that I've always been a people pleaser. I'm someone who always wanted to go above and beyond, and I wanted people to like me. I wanted to be accepted. And I realized often people, take advantage of that, in particularly in a corporate world, right? So learning to set boundaries, learning how to say no, learning how to kind of negotiate in a respectful way about what is a reasonable ask or what is a reasonable, workload, and learning how to speak up and stand up for myself. It's something I'm still working on. It's something, that I'm still trying to get better at and trying to find my voice, because I've always been somebody who's very diplomatic and agreeable. But sometimes, you need to put your foot down, or you need to set the tone or set the standard. So getting better at that's been something that has been, that was the beginning of that. Me quitting that job was the beginning of that for me. So I'm still working on it.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to follow your career. I know, we've obviously have met in person before, but I just want to say, thank you, first of all, for sharing your story, but just thank you for all the work that you do and all the advocacy you do for people of color and, really elevating diverse voices across the country. It's so powerful and impactful. And I just look forward to continuing to follow your work and to see what you do next.
Thanks so much.
Thank you again, Ginella. And thank you to all of you for watching and listening. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a 5-star review. We also love hearing from you. You can find me on social media at Priya Sam. Until next time, take good care of yourselves and of each other.